All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. I'm still a little bit under the weather, but that's no excuse. We got Cowboys news to get to, of course. But as always, let's get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And I'm gonna pull up this graphic that was going around social media after Sunday Night Football involving the Los Angeles Chargers in PFF grading specifically. So you can see on the screen in front of you right here, the right tackle, right guard, left tackle, and center for the Chargers. The right tackle, Pipkins, is ranked 35th out of 36. Becton, their right guard, 36 out of 37. Their left tackle, 38 out of 38. And their center, 36 out of 36. And the narrative going around social media was, my God, how bad is this Chargers, which offensive line does have some injuries, but how bad is this Chargers offensive line? And I think they're not a good group for sure, but I think everyone who talked about this online is totally missing the point. I wonder if a lot of you guys, when you first saw this graphic, had the same reaction I did, is that PFF does not know how to evaluate the Chargers offensive line play, right? They're grading the Chargers offensive line on a basis that they themselves aren't being graded against, because there is no way on God's green earth that the Chargers somehow, just by some weird coincidence, have the literally four worst starters at the offensive line, two second worst, two absolute worst, all at the same time. There are 32 teams in the National Football League. That would just be a statistical, anomaly that would just be unprecedented in NFL history to literally have four of the bottom two at one position at the same time. That would be the same thing as, having basically four all pros at the same time. It just wouldn't happen, right? Even the great Cowboys offensive lines in the 2010s, they never had PFF grades in the positive, even as good as these guys are in the negative. So what does that tell you? It just means the Chargers, in terms of how they run their offense, PFF doesn't know how to grade it effectively. And I'm not saying these guys are good players. Some of them have had good seasons, some of them have not. But the reality is there is no way, this is such a statistical aberration, that this is even close to accurate. And it speaks to the flaws with PFF grading, the fact that they don't know how to evaluate certain teams. The Chargers are a very power football team. They run a lot of power, they run a lot of heavy formation, they run the rock inside. And what we've seen from PFF is that they hate teams that run that. They grade them incredibly harshly. I think you look at teams that run more standard inside zone, outside zone, PFF likes them from a grading perspective. And again, that's nothing against PFF. I've had my issues with their grading system. That's just how they grade it. But when they put out this graphic and people follow it and say, listen, look at these grades. This is a bad offensive line. And again, I'm not saying it's a good group. I think everyone's missing the picture here, is that this is an example of the Chargers offensive line being the worst in NFL history. This is an example of the analytics service, PFF. And of course, they're one of many that evaluate NFL players throughout the season. They don't know what they're talking about. So when you see data like this, always, exercise caution. And as we've noticed a lot on this channel, PFF tends to get a lot of things wrong. All right, let's get into the news. Let's pull up this post via Tommy Yerish. The Cowboys held an extremely impactful, extremely emotional team meeting today for the first time in person since Marshawn Kneeland's passing. Head coach Brian Schottenheimer got high marks from Solomon Thomas, how he handled it. Extremely proud of Coach for how he conducted today, just bringing therapists in the building, bringing people who we needed in the building, and just letting us be our true emotions, giving us a safe place to let everyone know what's going on inside. I haven't been around a program that's done something like that before, and it's a testament to Schottenheimer and his love for us, because we needed that today. We needed today just to be human and to cry and to let everyone know how we felt. Extremely draining and hard day, hard for everyone involved, hard for everyone who loved Marshawn. So it just meant a lot for Schottenheimer to conduct the day like that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's just an incredibly tough situation. I can't even imagine what these players are going through, because, there is the reality, it's a cliche, but there is a brotherhood among players. I played college football, and, I certainly loved my teammates. It's not love the way you would your brother or sister or your wife or anything like that, or your kids, but there is a serious, deep bond there, and have it tragically one of them taken from you is absolutely just devastating to a player, devastating to any man in that locker room. And listen, it was going to be a tough day. It was going to be a tough situation. And I think the way the Cowboys have handled it from a Schottenheimer leadership perspective, based on Solomon Thomas's comments, who, by the way, is one of the more respected people in the National Football League. He's a very charitable guy, very active in the community. So his words certainly mean something. But I do think the way Shotty reportedly handled it seemed to be good, right? This is one of those things where you can really screw this up. And I think we all know people that have kind of screwed up handling really tragic situations and leadership situations, whether it's in our, in churches, whether it's in, our business lives or personal lives. Someone just doesn't get they don't get the memo. They make it about themselves, or they miss the point, or the timing is wrong. We've all been there with certain situations when tragedy strikes, and it seems shoddy, and the Cowboys leadership has done a pretty good job up to this point. It's one of the reasons why I think Jerry Jones has been basically radio silent, which I think is 100% the correct move to make. I think Stephen Jones did an interview on 105.3 The Fan yesterday. I think that's the last time, or the most recent time, the Cowboys have done anything in terms of, public commentary since Marshawn Kneeland's tragic death. Listen, I think the leadership here has done a good job. I mean, this is really tough for the players. It's really hard to figure out, it's how they're going to handle this, how they're going to react to this. And it's going to take time, and credit to Shotty for doing it in this manner, doing it on, an off day, ostensibly a Monday, obviously isn't a traditional practice day. He's separating it completely from football. He didn't hold a team meeting, the morning of a practice day and say, all right, guys, let's get this out of our system, and then let's go out and have a good practice this afternoon. That wasn't the case at all. He evidently, based on the reporting here, has set up a lot of structure for the players to give them people to talk to and work through. And that's really important, because obviously when you look at the culture of this team, and that's what the 2025 season is partly about, is, I talked about unwinding the cultural issues and the country club mindset a little bit, and a lot of, I don't want to say selfish play, but a lot more oriented toward the individual. And things like this really matter. It's sort of letting Schottenheimer know to his players, listen, we are in this together. We are a unit. We are, obviously a family is a cliche, but it does matter. It really does. I've never been on a team that's had to deal with tragedy like this, but I have been on teams and organizations, as most of you probably have, where there are tragedies and things strike and negative things happen, whether, things of much lesser degree, of course, than what happened to the Cowboys. But I've been in those organizations, and leadership, I tell you what, 99 times of 100, they screw it up. They make it about them. They don't treat it serious enough. They don't, give everyone a voice. It's one of those things where you have to let everything play out. You have to let all the emotions play out. Give every single person everything they need. Most of the time managing and leading, you don't want to lead to, every single person, every single voice. But this is one of those situations where you have to kind of let everyone get it out in the open, everyone kind of work together and come together, because this is a Cowboys team right now that no one knows in the National Football League, what they're feeling right now. It's a very, very terrible, tough situation, obviously. And they need to be able to feel as if their coaching staff has their back, because right now they're on an island, right? As much as people throughout the NFL have showed their love and support, and it's gracious, of course, the fact that other teams have done this, but the reality is no one knows what they're feeling, right? I don't know if you guys watched Monday Night Football, last night, but you can see Micah Parsons was, praying on the sideline before the game, just by himself a little bit. And it's obviously he played with Kneeland. He knows Kneeland, of course, personally. There's certainly a connection, a bond there. They were in the same position group, of course, defensive end, edge players. It's just one of those things. Parsons, you could see like, okay, he's a little by himself now. And this is sort of what the rest of the Cowboys players are going through, but they have each other. And listen, I don't know what it means in terms of wins and losses and performance and play and things like that, right? And that's a discussion, and that will play itself out over the course of the next 8 games. But based on just, again, this data point here, this reporting, it appears as if Shotty and the Cowboys leadership handled this the right way. They didn't make it about themselves. They gave this a full day, full commitment, 100%. And it sounds like something that would be so obvious to do, but boy, oh boy, there are organizations that screw it up. There are leaders that screw it up. And based on the reporting, Shotty didn't. So credit to him and his staff and the entire Cowboys organization for handling this when it comes to the players, the coaches, and the entire locker room, for handling this the right way. All right, this next report is courtesy of Calvin Watkins. Stephen Jones, this is on an interview yesterday on 105.3 The Fan. This was, again, like I said, the first Cowboys public-facing commentary. Stephen Jones said, we do think we can get in a run if some injured players get healthy, such as Overshown and Hooker and Revel. So obviously this is, of course, the owner's going to say, hey, we think we can win some games and do some good things. And of course, we all know about Overshown and Revel, but how about Hooker getting thrown in the mix there? I thought that was kind of an interesting third name to mention, because if you look at Cowboys defenders getting healthy, everyone's like, listen, it'd be great to see Overshown, though Revel in the cornerback mix could be interesting, right? A lot of people looked defensively and said, okay, maybe even Diggs coming back. But he doesn't mention Diggs, does he? He mentions Malik Hooker, according to Calvin Watkins. Well, I think speaks to a real problem I think the Cowboys recognized internally, which was obvious to anyone watching the Cowboys. that the injuries at the defensive back position, primarily safety, really put them in a tough bind, right? I mean, they literally in back-to-back games against the Broncos and the Cardinals had points in the game where they had emergency safeties, nickel corner Reddy Stewart against Denver and undrafted free agent Zion Childress against the Arizona Cardinals actually get in the game in scrimmage snaps. So to put in some context, right, there's two starting safeties were Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker, right? Obviously, Wilson and Hooker have missed some time over the past few weeks, so they've had to enter Marquise Bell, Elijah Clark, and Wanye Thomas. Wanye Thomas has been hurt. Elijah Clark missed time. Marquise Bell has missed time, come out of the game. I mean, they've basically gone into games with third and sometimes fourth string safeties. And unless you're playing a team like Washington that, for example, also had injuries at that corresponding position, wide receiver, you just don't stand a chance, guys. You just don't. Unless you have like a world-class pass rush, like the best pass rush in football. Even then, it's so hard, right? You have to be just, getting it like immediate pressure. You have to get like 12 sacks that game or something. The reality is, and injuries suck, and they're a fact of life, and every team deals with it. So it's not an excuse. But one of the things that stinks about injuries is the timing of it, right? For example, if you play Washington, you're beat up in the secondary, they're beat up at wide receiver, it's kind of a wash. But you play Denver, they're pretty healthy at wide receiver. You play Arizona, they're pretty healthy at wide receiver, tight end. You just don't stand a chance, right? And listen, it's not an excuse. It's just the reality of the National Football League. Injuries matter. Look at the Baltimore Ravens. They're 4-5. They won 3 in a row. Defense is playing good. When their defense was banged up, they were giving up 40, 38, 37. I mean, they were getting gashed and destroyed. And people are like, what's wrong with the defense? Well, they had a lot of injuries, especially in the secondary and in the defensive line. They couldn't cover anybody and couldn't get a pass rush. Suddenly get a little healthier in the secondary, get a little healthier in the defensive line. Hey, what do you know? The defense is playing better, right? And again, that's not an excuse. Every team deals with injuries. Every team has to go through the ups and downs. It's just a fact of life, right? It's no one gets you a pass because of injuries, but it does speak to the realities of what you try and do as a team if you have so much injuries at a position that you're just stuck. And I commented, I think, after the Cardinals game, says, listen, if you look at this Cowboys secondary, and even against the Arizona Cardinals, right, when they're down the corners that they are, with Revel and Diggs obviously still out, right, but let's just throw away Revel for a second. So you have Trayvon Diggs was out, Wanye Thomas was out, Malik Hooker was out, Donovan Wilson was out. And so listen, you're down 3 of 4 starters in the secondary, right? There's very few teams in the NFL that can survive that. Very, very few, especially when you're already bad at that position to begin with, right? That's when it becomes a compounding problem. You see this with some teams with offensive line play, right? Where, they're not great at, let's say, left guard or left tackle or something, and they got a veteran in there who's average or a little below average, but, he gets hurt. Okay, and then you have to throw in a rookie 6-rounder and he's struggling, and then he misses a game because he gets hurt. Suddenly you're throwing an undrafted rookie off the practice squad and you just can't block anybody and you get massacred. Right? People are like, what happened? It's just like, listen, you already weren't great at a position. It was a position of weakness to begin with, and then you got worse and worse with the injuries. And that happened with Dallas over the past few games. And I think that's why Stephen Jones is saying, listen, Malik Hooker's return could be impactful. Now, I will say Malik Hooker has not had a great season by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's been a little bit below average as a safety. Donovan Wilson, notice his return isn't mentioned either, by the way. Wilson has not had a good season. There's a decent chance Wanye Thomas could supplant Wilson. Talked about yesterday, one of my predictions is a major personnel change. Maybe that's one of them, something to keep an eye on going forward. But I think the Cowboys look at Malik Hooker to be a stabilizing influence. And while he, again, has not had a good season at all, well, you compare the fact they basically had to just throw practice squad people and special teams guys out there the past few weeks, having just a guy who can line up and play safety at just an acceptable level, an acceptable NFL level, helps out a lot, right? Especially when you're trying to integrate more defensive linemen and a new linebacker and things like that. You want a guy that can, line up in the right spot. And I'm not saying that Marquise Bell or some of these other guys couldn't do that or Elijah Clark couldn't, but it was clear. Marquise Bell, it was obvious. Watching the games, he is not, at least not right now, an NFL safety, right? Elijah Clark is not an NFL safety. Zion Childress only played a handful of snaps. We'll have to see, but I kind of doubt he's an NFL safety right now in his full career. Now, there's anything wrong with that. He's an undrafted rookie free agent. Both Childress and Clark are, right? I think Wanye Thomas does some good things, right? I think he may qualify. But the reality is Malik Hooker may not be a good NFL safety. He may not even be an average NFL safety. He can actually play NFL safety. So I think just getting him back, I think the Cowboys feel, based on the comments here, that's a big stabilizing impact, right? It kind of goes back to the Logan Wilson edition where it was like, listen, you're so bad at linebacker that just being mediocre is an upgrade. And I felt like the Cowboys also feel that way at safety with Malik Hooker potentially returning from injury, saying, listen, we were so bad at safety just because of injuries and poor performance to begin with. Right? We were CC minus with Hooker being a CC minus player this season. And but because we had the injuries, we became a D minus, F team kind of at that safety position, especially with all the changes and volatility. Hey, listen, if we go back to C minus, that's a big upgrade, right? And I think that's what the Cowboys, if you listen to Stephen Jones, that's what they're referring to here. All right, this next report is also courtesy of Calvin Watkins. The Cowboys plan to wear helmet decal and wear a special T-shirt for the next couple of games, honoring Marshawn. Kneeland, team official said. There will be a video tribute and moment of silence at the Eagles game November 23rd, where Kneeland's family and girlfriend will attend. That will obviously be the next Cowboys home game. They're on the road this upcoming Monday night. Yeah, I think this is probably a good thing in terms of the way they're handling the treatment, right? The tribute, not the treatment. I think, there's again, it goes back to how much is too much, how much is, not enough. It's a tough thing. Helmet decals and shirts and things like that. I think that's a good look. I think that's a good thing to do. I think the big tribute at home, I think that was coming. I think we all understood that was something to that effect. They still were working it out. Based on all the reporting, the Cowboys ownership and leadership had been meeting with Kneeland and his Kneeland's girlfriend, and Kneeland's family to discuss, hey, how do you want us to do this? What's the right way to do this? Which is what you should expect from any organization. But again, this is what I like about how the Cowboys have handled this situation, whether it's Shoddy or whether it's the leadership at the top. They have made it 100% not about them. Right, there has been very little public-facing statements I think there's been none from Jerry Jones outside of the standard PR. There's been nothing from Shoddy. It's been all about, making the players and Marshawn Kneeland and Kneeland's family, as it should be. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to the Cowboys as an organization for doing that. There's a lot of teams that would have screwed this up, right? There's a lot of teams that would have try to play this for sympathy or whatever, right? There's a lot of organizations, right, that would have followed the bad path. But the Cowboys leadership group, they did the right thing here. They understood we need to make it about Kneeland and Kneeland's family and make it about the players. Let's not make it about ourselves. We're the Dallas Cowboys. Whatever we say and do on this is going to be magnified to the extreme. And Jerry Jones gets a lot of credit. He's the owner. He's the GM. He's the leader of this organization. He deserves a lot of credit up to this point, right? We'll see what happens, of course. Things could change. But up to this point, he deserves a lot of credit for how he handled this situation. And this is what class act organizations do. And this is why I think when you talk to any of the former Cowboys, they all love Jerry Jones. They may criticize, hey, I don't know what he was doing here with his contract negotiation here or there, but they all love Jerry Jones and they all love the Cowboys because Jerry Jones treats his players, if you're a Cowboy once, you're a Cowboy for life. And it's very clear, at least to me, that the Jones family and the Cowboys organization viewed the loss of Kneeland correctly as the loss of one of their own, the loss of a Cowboy. And I think it should be treated that way, and they've done a great job of handling that primarily internally, making it all about the players, making it all about the family of Kneeland's family specifically. I think that's the right move to make, and they deserve credit for that, right? There's a lot of organizations that would not have done the right thing here. All right, on the same vein, here's Tommy Yerish commenting reporting on Stephen Jones' comments on 105.3 The Fan when asked about NFL teams holding moments of silence at games for Marshawn Kneeland. Jones said, "This is very difficult. I can't imagine for his family." And then, of course, you talk about his extended family, which is teammates in the Cowboys organization and everyone who cared and loved Marshawn so much. Whenever I've personally been involved in losing somebody, it's always good for your heart and soul when people either observe moments of silence or they send notes or whatever their method is of letting them know that you're thinking about you. Certainly, I'm sure to some degree that's how they feel. I'm not walking in their shoes. Yeah, again, this is exactly the right tone, right? Making it about a family. Listen, I'm not walking in their shoes, right? He just says, from my experience, that's good, but I'm not going to speak for them, right? I'm not going to speak for Kneeland's family. I'm not going to speak for the team. I'm not going to speak for the players. And this is the right message, right? Saying, listen, I personally, Stephen Jones, think it's good when these things happen, but I'm going to make it about Kneeland's family. I can't speak for them. That's on them to speak if they want to, which is absolutely 100% the right response. I mean, this is good management. This is good leadership. I mean, you can criticize the Jones family for their decision-making in terms of roster building and contract negotiations and things like that. But through this crisis so far, they've been A+, right? I mean, and then, like I say, there's been a lot of teams that would have really screwed this up somehow. The ownership group would have made it about them. There would have been a lot of leaks. There would have been a lot of lack of unification from inside the team. There would have been, for all the talk of Jerry Jones and the Jones family loving media attention and just grabbing media attention here, there's been absolutely none of that, right? And again, if he would have, it would have been a really bad look, and I would have said as much. But the fact is they haven't. They've been right every step of the way. And I think they deserve credit for that, right? Because this is one of the ways you can lose or destroy a culture, right? Moments like this, you have players, a player has unfortunately passed away. You have the players and coaches looking around. The NFL is a brutal business to begin with, and now they're obviously hurting. They're obviously in pain. Does their coaching staff, does the ownership, does the leadership, do the Dallas Cowboys have their back? And Jerry Jones, who's always been a guy that stood up for his Cowboys, proves once again that he will, in this case, stand up for the team by doing the right thing. He hasn't made it about him. Jerry Jones makes everything about him. Micah Parsons was about him. Dak Prescott deal about him. Every single game, after the game, he's one of the win or lose, or blowout win, blowout loss, close win, close loss. He's talking to the reporters 9 times out of 10, right? It's just who he is, what he does. He had a whole Netflix documentary about him and the Cowboys before the season starts, right? He loves the attention. He's all about it. But in this situation right here, he deferred all of that. He wants no attention. He's keeping it very, very quiet, focusing on the team and the players. And I think it's something that really matters. Now, it doesn't matter in terms of wins or losses. I don't know, and it's an uncomfortable reality, and it's not a fun thing to think about. But this is going to be a tough thing for these players to go through the rest of the season, right? It's going to be hard. How do you focus? How do you go through practice? How do you find energy in certain situations as the season wears on? It's really, really tough, right? I don't, I've never been in their shoes. I don't know, right? I like to think I've gone through at least college football, the college football that I played at FCS level for 4 years. I'd like to think I have some understanding of what it's like to be in a locker room in different situations, right? Because it is technically D1. But I've never been around anything remotely close to this. And I just don't know how the players will handle it and how they can and how you react and move on. And in some ways you can't move on, right? Because it's a tragic part of the season that sets the entire stage. But to their credit, the Cowboys leadership have given the Cowboys players everything they need and have done everything correctly up to this point. So at least as much as the ownership group and the leadership can do to help the players out, they're doing that. And I really want to emphasize that because it's something where Jerry Jones is so consistently and sometimes deservedly so, criticized and just thrown into the mud and said, oh, Jerry's the worst. And listen, a lot of times he deserves it with how much attention he grabs and the moves and decisions he's made over his tenure as the owner of the Dallas Cowboys for 36 or so years up to this point. But the reality is, so far, at least up to this point, they've done a good job. They've done the right thing every step of the way. And the hire of Shoddy, by the way, proves that it was a good move. I mean, can you imagine Jason Garrett in this situation? I mean, listen, I think, what was it, in 2012 or 13? I forget what season it was, when, unfortunately, I think it was Josh Brent, the nose tackle. I'm going to fact check right here myself real quick, just to make sure. I don't want to say anything incorrect, so I'm going to make sure when it comes to this tragic event, I get all the details correct. So I'm going to pull it up here. So this was Josh Brent, who played for the Dallas Cowboys, of course, and in 2012 got in a car crash that killed his teammate Jerry Brown, and that was during the 2012 season. Jason Garrett and how he handled that. Were there any sort of rave reviews or anything like we're seeing from Shoddy right now? No, not even close. In fact, he had Josh Brent on the sideline, I think, in their next game. It looked kind of weird. It was a weird situation, right? It was one of those deals. It just wasn't handled the cleanest from an organizational perspective. This is different, right? Shoddy, by Solomon Thomas's remarks, has done a great job. The Jones family has done a great job. And again, this is such a tough situation. There's no playbook. Right? There's no, hey, look at what other team did here, or what this other franchise did here, or what other owner did here. There is no playbook, right? This is where there is no process, there is no system to follow, there is no trail you can be your guide as you navigate this situation. But the Cowboys have found a way, at least from a leadership perspective, up to this point, and I think they deserve credit for that. All right, this next report is courtesy of the Skywalker Steel X account, as the Cowboys content creator. I think an interesting insight here in terms of some statistics he pulled up. Cornerback Kalen Carson saw his first defensive action of the season Monday night, and I thought he handled himself well. Played 42% of the snaps, wasn't targeted once. You could tell he was seeing it well, diagnosing route combos and moving with confidence. Arizona threw some tricky stuff at him, but he held up. Earlier in the season, those same looks were leaving guys wide open behind the cornerbacks. Promising start. Now it's about stacking weeks. Kalen Carson is sort of an interesting figure in this Cowboys secondary because he's sort of the forgotten man. I remember going into the 2024 regular season when Deron Bland got hurt. Steele was, outside corner going into, he was a rookie in 2024, and he had a really good camp. And a lot of people said, listen, he's a guy who can play football. And obviously a rookie fifth rounder, there's going to be some flaws. It's going to be, not perfect, and had kind of a rough start to the season and then got hurt. And that kind of derailed the Cowboys cornerbacks position, at least at that spot, right? They kind of were, threw in Booth and Owiarie for a while, right? It became just a revolving door of who can be that other outside corner with Jordan Lewis and Diggs, even though Diggs would end up missing time after Bland returned. So basically they had one of their outside corners was just always in a volatile situation pretty much the entire season. What else has changed, right? Seems to be a, different season, same story. But Kalen Carson is sort of an interesting situation because if he can become a competent player, there's a lot of matchup opportunities here. I mean, are we going to live in a world where Deron Bland is the inside corner primarily and Carson and Revel are the outside corners? That's something to keep an eye on, right? Is Kalen Carson just a good depth piece from an outside corner perspective, with potentially Revel replacing Trayvon Diggs? And then, maybe they draft an outside corner, or maybe they have Deron Bland play primarily outside and Reddy Stewart becoming the future nickel. Or maybe they have a bunch of different packages, right? Maybe they start Carson this week and start Revel this week and have Bland on the inside. Is there that option, right? There's a lot of different things in front of here for the Dallas Cowboys. So Kalen Carson, to me, is one of the more interesting guys to keep an eye on. He's not a guy that's mentioned a lot, and I don't think he's expected to be a star. But if you look at the guys the Cowboys expect a lot out of, namely Bland and Revel, and assuming this is Diggs' last year with Dallas, it's like, well, who's the third corner, right? And is that Kalen Carson, right? Because Kyrie Elam, listen, he hasn't had a great season. Let's be totally honest, right? It was sort of a, hey, we'll see what happens. We'll take a flyer on him, see if there's any reclamation project. There hasn't been. Listen, sometimes reclamation projects, Javonte Williams, sometimes they'll work out great, George Pickens. Sometimes they don't, Kyrie Elam, right? Again, you get some hits, you get some misses when you go after those kind of guys. Like Murray, for example. Kenneth Murray is another good one. The reality is Solomon Thomas, not really a reclamation project, but he's worked out from a leadership and performance perspective. So there's going to be hits and misses. You're not going to bat 1,000. But Kalen Carson, I think it's just a developmental prospect that's very interesting. And what the Cowboys do at the cornerback position the rest of the season is going to be something to keep an eye on. But it also speaks to a point I made a bunch of time on this show that the Cowboys, in terms of where they are in the season right now, they're 9 games in, and we have no idea what the cornerback rotation is going to be, what their starting groups are going to look like. And it's probably going to change multiple times, right? I mean, again, there's a chance Kalen Carson becomes a starter. Right. And there's and Revel may start 2, and then Deron Bland may be inside, right? They could have packages where basically a 4-man rotation, depending on the situation, where Bland is either outside or inside, Reddy Stewart sometimes maybe at nickel, and then Carson and Revel play a lot, right? I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here for the Cowboys to really try and evaluate some of these players. And the fact of the matter is they basically benched Bridges against Arizona. And I don't mean to be mean against Bridges. He competed his butt off. But the reality is, if you look at the Cowboys, if everything had gone according to plan from an injury perspective, which it rarely does, but just assume a healthy Cowboys secondary, if you look at the outside corners, the Cowboys would have preferred Revel, Carson, Diggs, Butler, right? And then Bland as a potential moving outside guy, right? So then Bridges, who would have been the 6th corner on that list, who they'd like to see play, right? Again, Diggs, Revel, Butler, Carson, and then potentially Bland moving outside before moving Bridges outside. So he was their 6th option at outside corner, right? And he had to start multiple games. So that's obviously not an ideal situation. And injuries happen. It just does. You can't, every team deals with them. But the reality is the Cowboys are finally getting some of the guys back, right? The Kyrie Elam addition, I think if you asked the Cowboys in the offseason, they were honest with you, would have said, listen, we need a guy that can line up and play because Carson and Butler are hurt. Right? And then they drafted Revel, a great pick, I think. But the reality is he wouldn't be ready to play. So they had 3 corners. And Trayvon Diggs was coming off injury at the same time, too. So they had 3 corners plus drafting Revel who were banged up going into training camp at preseason. They just needed a guy that could line up and just play. He could, hopefully he could become a C minus player. And he really hasn't. He's been kind of a D player, if we're being honest. But they needed that guy. And it speaks to the season the Cowboys have sort of not been planning to have, but the reality. I mean, who goes into a season with that kind of mindset? A rebuilding team does. A rebuilding team. When they're like, okay, listen, the future of our secondary is probably a combination of Revel and Carson and maybe other guys, right? Obviously Bland and we hope Diggs, but we'll see with Diggs going forward. But we're not going to mortgage our future by bringing in a veteran corner so that way when we get healthy, Carson and Revel don't play at all, right? They said we're gonna ride with Kyrie Elam, right? We're gonna let that ride out. You notice they didn't do that at defensive end, by the way. You notice they signed Jadeveon Clowney, right? They did looked at Dante Fowler and they looked at Sam Williams and said these are 1 year rental guys. See if they can become stars. They're not playing. We're going to add Clowney and eventually we're going to bench both those guys, right? That was the mindset for those defensive players. You look at corner, they take it completely different. They didn't add a veteran there. They didn't trade for any help at corner once the season started. I understand they traded for Bridges and Stewart, but both those guys were supposed to be, depth pieces, practice squad guys. That's what Bridges was, or at least supposed to be. When you look at their cornerback room now, you kind of are starting to see, and this is before Butler's even at least practicing yet. We'll see what happens this week. But the reality is you've got Revel, who's going to make his debut, most likely. You got Carson, who, seems to be playing a lot of snaps or seems to be in line to play a lot of snaps. And that's who the Cowboys actually wanted at their 2 outside corners. And so Elam and Bridges and all these guys we've been seeing play all season long, they've been short-term stopgaps. And that's just, we talked about that. I think a lot of people understand that. That was just the reality. And the future of this team we're starting to going to see now. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is these are young players. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's going to be far from perfect. But the good news is finally we're going to see what the secondary is going to look like in the future or what it could. Just like the linebacker room, right? Overshown into the fold. Hey, now we're going to see what the linebacker position is going to look like, right? Obviously Logan Wilson was a good addition in terms of stabilizing, I think personally. Again, he's a C minus player. Should be an upgrade over the D performance they were getting before, and he's under contract through 2027. So we're going to see what the linebacker position looks like going forward, right? And it's going to be volatile. I mentioned this yesterday. There's going to be some inconsistencies, but we're going to actually see what this team is going to theoretically look like in future years. Now we're going to get a chance. Carson is healthy. Butler is healthier or should be healthy soon. Revel is healthy. Overshown is healthy, right? We're going to start seeing what this defense is actually going to look like in future seasons, and that should be exciting. Now, it's going to be nervous because they're young players. They're going to make a lot of mistakes, haven't played a lot of football. It's going to happen, right? I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not even expecting elite, not even anything remotely close to that. There's going to be a lot of yikes mixed in. I just think that's the case, right? Volatility, it's going to happen. But I do think finally we're about to see. A lot of people looked at, why is Kyrie Elam playing, right? Why do you have Kyrie Elam? Is this the future of our team? No, it's Carson and Revel at corner, right? Or at least it should be. And if they're not up to the task, we'll see what they do in the offseason, right? They've got 2 first-round picks. Now's the time to evaluate. Carson, Revel, and maybe Butler. Can those 3 guys be the outside corner core of the future? If they can, fantastic. If not, you got 2 first-round picks, add an edge, add a corner, and be off to the races. Let's see what happens. All right, this next report I want to talk about because this was after Sunday's games. The New York Giants, are 0-4 this season in games which they led by 10 or more points on the road. They led Dallas by 10 points relatively early in the first half. They obviously led big on the Broncos. They led against the Chicago Bears as well. So they've had a bunch of games this season where they had double-digit leads on the road and appeared to be in total control and then squandered those games. And now Brian Daboll has been fired. For anyone who isn't familiar with that, he is no longer the head coach of the New York Giants. And the reason I bring this up is because for anyone who follows the NFL at large, which I do for our main NFL channel, is that the New York Giants coming into the season, and we're a big vibes team. They're a big high energy team. They're a big momentum. Feels good. Everyone's feeling good. Good, warm, fuzzy feelings all around. A lot of energy, a lot of vibes, a lot of good mojo. And then they start the season slow, right? Disappointing losses. Obviously, Dallas played its part in that, defeating New York in week 2 in that crazy overtime game. And then they benched Russell Wilson. They went with Jackson Dart, and little flush of energy, little flash. People like, whoa, new quarterback, new style of play. How do we adjust? They win 2 of 3, playing good football, right? Beating Denver in Denver, surprising a lot of people. And then they have these collapses. They have these, games where they're just falling apart down the stretch. And now they're 2-8, and now they fire their head coach, and they're in, again, total rebuild. We'll have to see who they bring in going forward. But this is a cautionary tale for the Cowboys and for any team, actually. Vibes can't win you games. You can't be a high vibes, high energy team, because there's going to be moments in an NFL season and in an NFL game where all the vibes are down. Things are going bad. You've lost a couple games, right? You've lost 2 of 3. You've lost 3 of 5. You've lost 3 in a row, 4 in a row, whatever it may be. You've got injuries, right? You've given up 20 straight points, right? You were winning 10-0, now you're losing 20-10, or you were you were down 20-0. You came back to take the lead, and then the other team scored, right? You can't live on vibes, right? It's so much momentum swings back and forth over a game, over a season, over a month. You have to be a steady team. You can have a culture that's positive and have good energy, but you can't be a team that's dependent on that energy and vibes. You have to rely on your execution and your talent, right? You have to be deliberate. You have to be good at all the little things. And that's a cautionary tale for any team, and certainly the Cowboys as well. Now, I don't think Shoddy's a vibes coach. That's nothing remotely close to that with Dallas. He's been the exact opposite. He's been kind of a straight shooter. He's been, he's a positive guy. He's an energy guy, but he's a very honest, direct, blunt guy. And he's very much about the system and the process and the willingness to make change and things like that. So I don't think there's any risk, at least the way it sits right now. We'll see if things change of Shoddy. If Shoddy has flaws and issues, I don't think it'll be like Dable this year with the Giants, where they were just a whole vibes and energy team. And when they lost the vibes, everything fell through the roof. But this is one of the things when you're a momentum team, when you're an energy team, when things go south, how can you handle it? I'll give you an example of a momentum team. The 2023 Dallas Cowboys. They were a team that rode high on momentum in a game, tidal wave. That's what the Cowboys were at their best. But when the problem is you don't get that tidal wave, things look bad and you can't recover. And that's what happened in Dallas in 2023. Not nearly as bad as the Giants this year, record-wise, of course, but stay away from the vibes. Stay away from the tidal wave. This is one of the reasons why I love Shoddy harping on consistency. Dak Prescott harping on consistency. You need to be consistent, right? And this is something that is really important. You need the margin of different performances to narrow. You don't want to be a team, we've seen this with Dallas, scoring 41 week and 10 then what next, right? The Cowboys are still like that offensively. It's going to take time to figure that out, right? Now, look, you'd rather have the ability to score 40 than not, but you need to be more consistent. And I get it, it's the NFL, it's hard. But that's the most important focus for any team is be consistent and then be consistently good. And right now, the Cowboys, to their credit, are at least publicly saying we need to focus on consistency. I think everyone agrees with that. You don't want to be the vibes team. You don't want to be the vibes guy like the Giants because we all know how that ends. All right, this next report is courtesy of Joe Machota, Cowboys Executive Vice President. Stephen Jones had no interest in talking about this today on 105.3 The Fan, talking about the Packers and the trade with Green Bay, about the poison pill provision and all that stuff. He said, Mike is in our past. He's a Green Bay Packer. We're concerned about a future. We're fired up about the future and not about the past. That's a great answer, right? I mean, because it's a fair question because it was contract news that got released. It's like, hey, do you have any details on that? Any strategy behind that? And Stephen Jones is like, no, we're focused on the future, which again, I think is another example of good leadership so far for the Dallas Cowboys up to this point. I mean, it's been as rough as a few days as you can imagine, with obviously the news Kneeland's passing, and the leadership again up to this point has done a very good job answering every question, whether it comes to Kneeland or other items as well. All right, let's get into the comments section. We'll get started with member comments, as I always do. Appreciate our members. My promise to every member is I will answer every single member comment and answer them all first. And if time permits, I will get to as many non-member comments as possible. So the first member comment today is courtesy of It's Juma 3231. Don't have a lot of time to comment, but in the chance that Javonte is asking for a lot of money, I think Jerry should go pay A-Chain from Miami. He's a fantastic do-it-all back. Yeah, I listen, I think that's not a bad solution at all. I'm a big Devon A-Chain fan. I just think A-Chain, because of his playmaking ability and his, he'll have a couple games a season where he totally just goes off like he did against Buffalo on Sunday. You're going to get some team that looks at his numbers and look at his games and say, listen, maybe in a better offensive line, maybe we can turn him into an all-pro. I just think you're going to get some team that's going to really overpay for A-Chain. But if not, I wouldn't mind having on the Dallas Cowboys. Not at all. He's a great player. Jamal Haldum 5712 comments, can't believe how you don't recall how bad the 2011-2013 offensive lines were. Garrett bit the bullet on a rebuild of the line and had to get to Jones to accept that it was time to invest in the line. Tyron was a rookie that season and the rebuild began. The defense was wearing a bunch of guys. The front was decent, but the secondary was really bad. It's unfair to say they had championship roster. They had popular guys, but much like now, the bones of the team were weak. Well, I get the point where it's like they had flaws. But if you look at the actual rosters, and this was my point, is they had three, again, let's put Tyron Smith to the side. He was a young player, okay, even though he was really good out the gate. Let's put him to the side. They had 2 first-ballot Hall of Famers, one on offense, one on defense, right? They had an all-pro, or franchise quarterback in his prime, DeMarco Murray, Des Bryant, Miles Austin, right? They had, I think you can look and say the offensive line had issues. Okay, that's fine. They're rebuilding that. But if you look at the skill players, you're looking at Hall of Famers. You're looking at all-pro guys, franchise quarterback. How about on defense, right? Pro Bowl guys in Jay Ratliff, young stars in Sean Lee, veterans at the end of their career, but still experienced veterans and guys like Brady James and Terrence Newman, right? They had Sensabaugh, right? Veteran guy, not an elite guy by any means, but a veteran guy. right? And so you can look at the secondary, and I think that was not a good secondary overall. They certainly didn't play that way. But if you look at the team in general, at least on paper, and they had talent, right? They had legit talent. You look at teams that are good this year, look at the Green Bay Packers, for example. How many Hall of Famers do the Packers have on their roster right now? Maybe Micah Parsons if he stays on this track. Maybe, right? Who else? None, really. I mean, you look across most teams in the NFL, right? I think even the Philadelphia Eagles, I think Lane Johnson certainly jumps out to me as probably a Hall of Famer for sure. But outside of that, how many do the Eagles have? I mean, Barkley's on a good track, but I think he's in the Hall of Very Good right now. I don't think he's in the Hall of Fame. He may end up in the Hall of Fame before it's all said and done. We'll have to see. But we're talking, again, one or two, right? The Cowboys had literally a Pro Bowl franchise quarterback and 2 Hall of Famers on their roster. That's better. Just take that by itself. And that's better than 2/3, the majority of the NFL today. Then you add the other players. Dez Bryant, Miles Austin, DeMarco Murray on that same team. Tyron Smith, a rookie, I get it, but still. Defensively, Jay Ratliff, Brady James, Sean Lee. In terms of linebackers, Terrence Newman, veteran corner. I get it past his prime, but he's still a veteran guy, could play a lot of football, right? And I'm not saying these were great, dominant teams, and they clearly weren't. They had their flaws. But it speaks to the level of talent they did have despite their flaws. And that's what makes those 8-8 teams so disappointing is that, yeah, they weren't perfect. No NFL team is, right? Look at the Eagles last night. Look at the Packers last night. 2 contenders in the NFC. Look at their flaws. And they're 2 of the top teams in football, right? Every team has flaws. Championship teams have severe flaws, right? They all do. That's just a fact, right? The Patriots, the Chiefs, they've won dynasties with teams that, with backup corners or mediocre offensive line or no star receivers or whatever, right? Every single team has flaws, right? The best teams in football have flaws. The best teams in NFL history have flaws. But that Cowboys team, just based on top-line talent alone, should have been a lot better than 8-8 back-to-back seasons. And I think we should acknowledge that and understand, man, what went wrong. Because if you don't identify what went wrong in years where you had championship talent, which again, if you have multiple Hall of Fame players and a franchise quarterback, that's a championship talent team. Sorry, that just is, especially when you factor in all the other talented guys. DeMarco Murray, Miles Austin, Dez Bryant. I'm not talking about like Cole Beasley, who wasn't even playing yet. He was on the team, but wasn't even playing, right? I'm not talking about Cole Beasley. We put Tyron Smith aside. Mike Jenkins was a young corner. He was not a great corner, but a competent guy, right? They added Brandon Carr. Didn't work out, but at least on paper it should have. Like that team on paper had the talent to win a championship for sure, and they didn't even make the playoffs. 8-8 back-to-back seasons, and by the way, a pretty, not dominant NFC. So it wasn't like they were going up against Tom Brady, in the Patriot dynasty, or the heyday of the AFC North, where the Ravens were winning championships and the Steelers were winning championships, right? In that same time period, they weren't playing in the AFC North when it was brutal. When the Bengals were good with Andy Dalton and the Steelers and Ravens winning championships, it was a good division, but not a great division, right? They just underperformed. And I just think it's important to realize that historically in order to evaluate where the Cowboys went wrong or where they could figure that out and not make the same mistake going forward. All right, David Dobbins, 5887 writes, I have somewhat of a less bleak post-bye defense prediction than yours. 6 players with experience at all 3 tiers of the defense. With some players now a tailor fit can be reasonably projected to do so fast. Like, comment, subscribe, hype. Thank you, David. I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, I just think volatility matters, right? In terms of not having continuity, in terms of playing together. And I think you just get some inconsistencies. I think that's what we're going to see. I talked about it yesterday. We're going to see the Cowboys maybe, I made this point before, maybe go to Philadelphia and beat Philadelphia, then lose to the Giants in New York. I'm sorry, or beat Philly at home, for example, and then lose to the Giants in New York, right? I could see a world where that happens, right? I'm not saying it will. Wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I could see them beating a playoff-bound Chargers team and then losing to the Giants or something like that, right? I think that's, I'm not predicting that will happen. I'm just saying if that happened, I'd be not too surprised, right? There's so many new players, so much change. You have no idea what could happen down the stretch. All right, next comment here is from Mercy FNV 6264. Great Super Bowl contenders have been strong defensive coordinators who have been with their teams for years. The Cowboys had their short window with Dan Quinn and those guys. We're back to the drawing board. Yeah, and I mean, listen, the jury may be out on Dan Quinn a little bit here, although I don't think he's a bad coach. I just think he's more of a turnaround artist than he is an elite defensive coach. But I think the big question is going to be, is Eberflus the long-term guy at defensive coordinator? And we'll have to see. I think this is a big evaluation stretch for him the rest of the season. Rob FPV1 writes, overpaying is bad in the salary cap era. That's something that is haunting us, and the overpaying of Dak and Lamb haunts us. I understand Prescott is overpaid a little bit, and I think CeeDee Lamb isn't overpaid. I think he's been worth every penny, right? He's a star player. Star players cost money, right? You can make an argument Dak Prescott versus his performance is overpaid, and I would agree with that to a certain point. But the reality is, listen, anyone who's been alive from, the Troy Aikman days to the Tony Romo days, that 6-7 year run of just quarterback hiatus was just yikes, right? Just yikes. There just was no hope, right? The best you could hope for was, hey, let's have an easy schedule and our defense has an all-time year, and we go to the wild card round and get smacked, right? That was, of course, in 2003 and with the Cowboys with an easy schedule. Parcells' first year, and a defense had just a bonkers, crazy, special kind of season, and then they were good enough to win only 10 games and get embarrassed in the wild card round. I think, that's just the fact. That's just what happened. There were a lot of seasons that were worse than that, 3-5-11s before, 6-10 after. There was Dallas had four seasons and 5 where they had double-digit losses, right? And then 2005, they won 9 games, right? And then you're like, well, damn, Drew Bledsoe's not the long-term answer. And then enter Tony Romo, and then suddenly they start winning more consistently. It's not a surprise, right? Same thing with Dak Prescott's emergence. It's not a surprise. Now, is Prescott overpaid? Sure. But you could always be the Cleveland Browns. You could be the New York Jets, right? You could be a lot of these other franchises. You could be the Atlanta Falcons that have had, talent for a long time. They've had, 8 or 9 straight losing seasons in a row. It seems to be heading for another one. And they just can't get quarterback right? They have talent on the team. Just old Matt Ryan. They tried Desmond Ridder, tried Kirk Cousins. We'll see what happens with Michael Penix Jr. But the reality is, if you don't have quarterback right, you just look at the Saints, since Drew Brees retired, right? If you don't have quarterback right, you just don't stand a chance. Uncle Bubba knows everything. 9143 writes, one thing I believe is that when Jimmy came to Dallas, he cut or traded anyone that wouldn't buy into his brand of football. Jimmy wasn't an X's and O's guy. He was a master manipulator and hard man. I'm not sure his brand of football could work in this new soft NFL, but it would be a fun thought experiment to ponder. I would make an argument in a lot of ways it didn't work even then because it didn't last, right? Even Jimmy Johnson said, listen, I couldn't be the meanest guy in the world for forever. I was wearing him down, right? One of the reasons that I think the Jones-Johnson split was able to happen is because Jimmy Johnson really at that point was probably saying, listen, I don't want to do this for too many years anyway, right? So the heck with it. I might as well just leave now. I'm mad at Jerry Jones. We're fighting. If I only want to do this a few more years, why not wait, right? Why wait, excuse me. Let's just end this now. And I think that was a big reason why. I think Jimmy Johnson obviously deserves his Hall of Fame. He's one of the great coaches in football history, college, NFL combined, certainly. But his style, certainly in the NFL, certainly with the Dallas Cowboys, was in such a manner that it wasn't sustainable. Landry was sustainable. He was a system. Jimmy Johnson was, like you said, a master manipulator. He was basically the closest thing to Vince Lombardi that we've seen in the modern era, right? Especially in terms of championships, in terms of success turning around a franchise. Would it work in today's NFL? I don't think so, because I don't think teams would have patience for it. Right? Remember, Jimmy Johnson went 1-15 in 1989, and then 7-9 in 1990. They were 3-7 through 10 games, right, in 1990, I believe. So it's one of those things where he was 4-22 to start. He probably would have been fired, right? Especially with his attitude and the way he was driving the players. There would have been all kind of locker room leaks, social media issues. He would not have lasted. It's just a guy for a different time. And I think even if you asked him that, he'd probably say the same thing. William Van Dyke writes, Steele is one of the premier run blockers in the league. Terrence Steele talked about here. They better get it right when they consider cutting him. I think he's a good run blocker. I think premier may be a little bit of a stretch, but he's below average in pass protection. And it's one of those things where if you can, a player's an aggregation of all the value they provide versus how much they cost, right? So if he's, let's say, a top 10 run blocker, but a bottom 10 pass blocker, that kind of averages out to about average, right? And when you have a lot of money at Dak Prescott in terms of the quarterback and a lot of money and capital at receiver, potentially with Lamb and Pickens, you kind of sit there and say, we need some pass protection, and we're going to rely on, a lot of our scheme and strategy for the running game, which so far seems to have worked. Javonte Williams has had a really nice season, but a lot of it's been a young offensive line, volatile offensive line. A lot of it's been the X's and O's and Shoddy and Clayton Adams. So, I agree they need to make sure they do their due diligence, of course. But the reality is, if you look at Terrence Steele, he's being paid above average tackle money for playing about average overall, and especially considering tackles are primarily pass protectors. It's a big red flag. All right, next comment here is from Jason Compton, 1625. My dad is a Redskins fan, and this is what I told him. The best year for Quinn is always his first. He will turn the defense around quickly, but he loves older and veteran players, and then it will fall. Every team he's coached does this 100%, and this is what we're seeing in Washington right now. Fred's Legacy Game, 6157. Found this show out of nowhere, and now all I do is watch it while at work. Also, I think we should keep Matt. I don't know if switching a coach every year is going to cut it. Well, thank you for watching it. Hopefully I'm not distracting you too much from your job. I don't know, this crazy background and all the crazy, animations I do. I mean, look at this, guys. Slide transition, not even a transition, just going to 2 different slides. I mean, that's top-notch production. That's what I bring to the table. But yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thank you, Fred, for commenting. It means a lot to me. And hopefully I'm not distracting you too much from your job. Hopefully that's not the case. Laylo7761 writes, obviously way too early, but assuming you sign Javonte Williams to a team-friendly 3-year deal, Overshown is a career 10-game guy because of injury, and Revel is a floor third-string cornerback, ceiling good second-string cornerback. Where do you go in the draft this year? I kind of disagree about the floor third-string, ceiling second string. Do you mean number 2, right? Are you assuming first-string cornerback, would that say be just your number 1 corner? Because I don't think his ceiling is a good, it's like my second string to me. I mean, a guy who doesn't start, a guy who's your 3rd or 4th corner, right? Is that what you're saying the ceiling is for Revel? I don't really think so. I think the ceiling is a guy who's your 1st or 2nd corner, right? I think he was a 1st or 2nd round guy. Now we'll have to see, of course. And third string to me would be like Bridges, Triquise Bridges, right? That to me is a 3rd string corner. Borderline practice squad guy. So I kind of, maybe I misunderstand what you're getting at there, but I'm going to assume you mean by second string corner, you mean number 2. So to answer your question about where do you go in the draft, so you got 2 number 1 picks. I think it goes back to a lot of how Kalen Carson plays, right? If you think Kalen Carson, and if Butler comes back and it looks like he can be a good depth piece as well, if you look at Kalen Carson and say, okay, he's actually a competent corner, right? He's a decent corner. We'll keep him on the roster. We like Revel. Revel seems to be doing some good things. Okay, we like Carson and Revel and Bland, and then we have Stewart be our nickel guy. We'll mix in there as well. Butler's a depth piece. Okay, with our 2 number 1s, we're probably going to go defensive end, playmaker in the front 7, most likely with our first pick, and then with the second first-round pick, depending on what teams are looking for, potentially trade back. There is, because of the quarterback nature of the upcoming draft, there is going to be an opportunity for the Cowboys to trade back for their first pick. That's also something to keep an eye on. I think there's a good chance they trade out of one of their 2 picks, and if I had to guess one, it would probably be the second, but it could be the first, trade back into the first round, or trade deeper into the first round, pick up, let's say, some second-round picks, maybe a second-round pick in 2026, and then maybe another first in 27 or a couple other picks, and then you go edge defensive player there, and then you use your second-round pick to maybe get a safety or something like that. That's kind of what I feel Dallas is going to do. We'll have to see how it all shakes out, of course. All right, that's enough for today, guys. Full show. Appreciate you guys hanging in there. I'm hopefully getting over this flu or whatever the heck I got from my kid's birthday party. I mean, geez, one of the things I've learned, and I know a lot of you guys who have kids know this already, is that little kids, you get every disease known to man. It just wears you out. But listen, the Dallas Cowboys dealing with the toughest situation you can imagine. Leadership doing a good job there. Players working through it, and that's all you can really ask of them at this point. I think obviously the players and the coaches, they need our support and they need each other, and it's going to be one of those things where they're just going to have to work through it as they try and find a way to pick up the pieces after this tragedy. And based on what we're hearing, they're doing a good job mentally and with our support, and they're continuing working through it. Hopefully, as the Cowboys nation is certainly hurting, and this is a wound that obviously for these players and coaches will never go away. And so it's going to be a tough situation for them. And I think at this point, we should continue to give them our full support, as I know we all will. But obviously more news to come this week as the Cowboys prepare back. Bye week is over. A lot of new additions, position battles, a lot of interesting news to get to over the next days, weeks, and months. And I will be here every morning, every step of the way. And until then, starting tomorrow morning, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.